Someone can show up and say, I built it and it works. And they're maybe not an engineer. And then what happens is what I call the great search for the asterisk.
Paul Ford is one of my favorite tech writers. He just has this way of capturing the beauty and the absurdity of tech like few others. You may have read his writing in the New York Times or Wired or on F-Train, the blog he's been writing since before the word blog existed. I invited Paul to Future Around and find out because I wanted to get his take on this weird moment we're in with AI and vibe coding tools that allow anyone to sorta make software. This is upsetting some apple carts.
Person A comes in and is just like, save money. And the person B is like, no, you're ruining my craft.
Paul is the co-founder of Aboard, an agency that helps organizations use AI to build custom software quickly. He likens the firm to a tugboat that you can hitch to big AI.
What does a tugboat do? A tugboat makes sure you get safely into port and make sure people can get on and off the boat.
So hop on board the SS Fafo and let's sail through some AI-infested choppy water.
I can't believe it's not software is sort of the name of this moment.
Welcome to Future Around and Find Out, where we celebrate the breakthroughs called BS on the hype and explore how things might go sideways and how we, together, can steer the future in the right direction. Hi, I'm Dan Blumberg. I'm an independent technologist and former NPR journalist, and on the show, you'll hear sharp takes on what builders need to know now. Learn more, sign up for the newsletter, and ask questions of upcoming guests at futurearound.com. A decade ago, you wrote an opus, not with Opus, but an opus in Bloomberg called What is Code, in which a senior vice president at some big enterprise is trying to decipher why exactly his team is saying we have to re-platform the tech stack. And the TMITB, the man in the taupe blazer, who I remember well, was a scrum master, is trying to explain it. If the SVP was baffled back then, was he or she baffled about today? Does the man in the taupe blazer have a job today? Like, catch us up.
Well, we're in a funny moment, right? I mean, I think, so that piece, so that's 10 years ago, thereabouts, was written to explain the rising power differential in the business world of technology. And it was specifically for that, like just what, and it was Business Week saying, what is code? And so it was probably one of the most popular things I've ever written. And it was really an explainer about a culture that's arisen around a discipline, okay? And so, but it was, why do the technologists have power and how do they behave and what's going on? And I think we are seeing a real sea change in how technology power operates because let's just be very critical of engineering teams. You're a product manager. They can, at the best, they're incredibly useful and they drive stuff forward and they're very aligned with the business and or the organization and so on. At the worst, they are gatekeepers and they don't want to let anything through unless it hits their standards. And it can take a lot of forms, right? It can take you'll be in the not-for-profit world and they'll be like, it all has to be purely open source code. And it might now suddenly you're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on an ideology that might not be core to the mission. It's core to their mission. And they're there, but because engineering culture is such what it is and engineers are very expensive, everybody be like, okay, all right, I guess we're going to just deal with this. That dynamic does not feel the same today. It feels like that dynamic is starting to shift in that, you really have a very tricky dynamic right now, which is and I'm going to say dynamic 150 more times, so everybody get ready. Which is that someone can show up and say, I built it and it works, and they're maybe not an engineer. And then what happens is what I call the great search for the asterisk. And the asterisk comes after the product. And it's like, but it's not real, or it won't, it's not good. It can't go to production. It's not blah, blah, blah. But then if an engineer gets involved, they can be like, well, it's running on the Postgres database and it's got a nice React front end. I don't necessarily love the auth model, but we could switch in OAuth. And suddenly in 3 steps, you could have a really viable application that people are excited about using, and it might have happened in a week instead of 6 months, right? And so that's a very, very, now that sounds really positive and exciting in a funny way, but it's also incredibly destabilizing. And so people throw out the asterisk, and the asterisk could be security, it could be design quality, it could be product. I have some, everybody has some. Everybody's like, well, hold on a minute. That's not exactly what I would call software. It's I can't believe it's not software is sort of the name of this moment. And, I think that SVP confused about their loyalties, confused about what they're hearing. And I think a lot of managers are like very happy for everyone else to use AI and fantasizing about how it could replace certain people and functions, and incredibly confident that it would never replace them because they go to all those meetings.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. How are you dealing with just the whiplash of the moment? We were supposed to do this interview a couple months ago, and then I had a dental emergency that day, so we didn't. So here we are today. And in that period, the new version of Claude Code came out, and worlds are changing, dynamics are changing. Like, how are you coping with the rapid change?
It's freaking hard. Like, it's just really hard. Like, everything's really confusing, and things that you thought were kind of inviolable are actually yielding. And then there are ideas that are kind of wackadoodle, like this, which work, which is just put in a loop and tell it to test and it'll build. Like, code is really tricky. I don't want to read a novel created by AI, right? I don't want 300 pages. And actually, somebody just sent me like some big pile of AI output because they were trying to prove a point. And it's just unreadable. After 10 seconds. But that's not code. Code runs on the computer. And so what do I do actually is you got to stop fighting. The way I think about it, I'm in a medium-sized organization, okay? Like, we're little, actually. We're little org. We're dozens of people all in. And I think of us as a tugboat, and there are enormous cruise ships that are just sailing around. Mm-hmm. And what does a tugboat do? A tugboat makes sure you get safely into port and make sure people can get on and off the boat. Okay. And that is, I see the big LLM companies as cruise ships. They're like, they're not going to talk to you. They're going to drop a huge pile of undifferentiated features built up from LLM capabilities that no one's ever thought about before. The things that their tools do, they don't even know. And somebody's got to be in there to just kind of nudge it safely and let people get on and off without falling into the ocean. And so coming back to that, right? So what is a mission? A mission is, this change is happening. Some of it is good. Some of it is bad. Much of it's bad, frankly. I personally feel responsible to guide people towards the value that is in the world right now and to try to find ways to get that value. We had a big not-for-profit come in. And, what's funny too is when you get outside of software people or creative industries people, doctors love AI. They love it because it summarizes notes for them.
Yeah, they can go to sleep a little earlier.
Literally. They call it pajama time. We've talked about it on the podcast before. And then so not-for-profits love AI because they're caught with Salesforce or their custom CRM, and they kind of can't get that next step. And what they might have is let's say $5,000, $6,000 a month, right? Which is a lot to them. And it's not a lot to Salesforce. It's not a lot to a legacy agency, but it is actually enough that you could probably use these tools to put together a pretty good solution, deploy it somewhere, and keep an eye on it for them. Yeah. And so they're getting that, and they're going wait a minute, this cause of friction where I've glued together a world from 4 SaaS products, and I've got data flying all over the place, and my people are always kind of yelling at me, and I have to get the report done for my funders and so on. They're like, maybe that goes away. Yeah. Could it go away? And so they're reaching out going hey, what happens now? And so I think if you just don't look too far into the future, but just sort of focus on what is giving people pause now, there's going to be an enormous amount of stuff to do.
Yeah. So the good is that people that never could afford or would have reason to build custom software, now they can have that. That's a big part of that.
People see a lot of the bad structural stuff, but that's a kind of localized miracle because it's people who are literally, I had somebody not too long ago just be like, I can feed more hungry people if I had this, if my CRM did this, right? Yeah. And it's well, your CRM could do that.
Yeah. I know you've been vibe coding a lot lately. You wrote about it in the New York Times. You're on the train. You pop up on the Manhattan Bridge, and I guess you get connectivity and things change for you, which is a fun visual that I could certainly get around. And you said that some of the work that you did or you could do over the weekend, you would have ordinarily charged $300,000 or more for, and you're seeing the faces of former employees of yours. Again, how do you sort of cope with the cognitive dissonance there of this is exciting, this is scary?
It's exciting and scary. I think, let me just say very clearly, I'm stating it, but I can't resolve it. And I go deeper on this, which is one of the things I worry and think about, not worry, but I really think a lot and spend a lot of time working on climate. And now we talk about Trump and we talk about AI in our culture, but we've forgotten about the climate, right? I know this goes really meta really quickly, but I actually doubled down on the anxiety. I'm just sort of like, wait a minute, these things are happening. They seem to be happening. A lot of people really hate that they're happening. Some people are really excited. Some people are making tens or hundreds of billions of dollars, and some are losing their jobs. At the same time, these other things are happening in the world that we've turned away from. And like, how is this all going to fit together? What's it going to look like? And I don't, like, again, people really want answers right now to everything. And it's a very answer-free world. Like, things that we took for granted, like democracy, are just kind of up for grabs. And it's scary as shit. Like, it's just not cool.
Or competence.
Yeah, that's right. I would love us to talk and not scream. Like, we're just kind of in a screamy zone. And I did that piece for the Times. And I'm just like, no matter what I say, no matter how I edit it, no matter what I do, I'm getting yelled at. It's a great Achewood cartoon. I put it on Blue Sky. It was just like, one of the characters is just going like, guess who's got yelled at, and it's just like, or who just got yelled at, and sort of like.
Do you want to, for those who didn't read the piece, do you want to just quickly summarize or share some of what was in there that, because I found it to be pretty nuanced. You're wrestling with things. That's what you talked about.
Yeah, nobody reads below the headline, for real. Like, nobody does. Or they read with one particular, like, people were upset about I didn't offer detail on climate. Right. But it's kind of unfair as a writer that you are expected to cover absolutely every base and every aspect of a piece. But really what happened is the Times called me up and they said, we think there's something about vibe coding. And I had this real sense of like, you're sitting at your living room and like the helicopter lands outside and they're like, we need you back in, Ford. And I'm just like, no, man, please. Not after what happened to Cindy. And she was a good woman, but we need you back in. And so like,
one last heist.
Yeah, one more. We just need you. No, God, please, no. But get those keyboard fingers moving. And so the piece is me just trying to explain vibe coding. I'll tell you what it really was fundamentally for me. I think that I'm a person, because of what is code and other things, who is associated with explaining the technology industry to a larger audience and trying to make it legible. And this is an absolutely fundamental change. And there have been many moments, and I get why people want to believe or are pretty sure why it's not going to matter as much as I seem to think. But I just can't look away from it. I got novelists sending me their vibe coded tools, and they're like in C++. Like, it's not trivial what's happening. It's not small, and it's scary. And so I was like, let me do my thing. Let me do my jazz hands, and let me tell people about what's coming. And sort of like tell them that I think it's real. And that is enough to infuriate everybody. But that was what the piece was about. It was just like, please pay attention, because I think it's a big deal and it could be really interesting. But it also, and not too long ago, you saw like Jack Dorsey fire half of Square, right? And it's like, or Block or whatever the hell it's called. And sort of.
AI is a good foil right now.
Yeah.
That's my take on that. I mean, anti-overhired and the rest of it, but like, AI washing, I like that term, wherever it came from. I think it's a good one right now.
I mean, I think I go back and forth because I think that guy is funny because he reads a gestalt and just sort of makes wacky decisions, but they seem to work out really well for him. And sort of like, I think you're right. I think, look, what's Block? I think they probably have like 9 million crypto projects floating around, and there was all sorts of stuff going on. And all the thing does is literally make money. And so there's this huge pile of cash, and everybody's like, oh, we got this big pile of cash. And what do? You have 5 different teams working on similar projects. And it's just, this happens with every big blobby org. And he went, what's funny is you're also going to have, and I'm sure he sees that. And he's like, oh, that's just how big orgs are. And he's like, yeah, but what's weird is AI is going to need a lot fewer in terms of programmers. He's like, all right, well, I guess we'll just do some murders.
Yeah, bold moves.
Yeah, exactly. And he's like, and then, what's the market going to do? They're like, I love it. That's great.
Did the Times reach out to you to write that op-ed before or after the Citrini research doomer narrative, whatever that was? Because if I remember right, it was published just after the market went berserk because of this fictional narrative that,
It was like a week. No, it took me like a week to write it. Like I was walking down the street in Boston, and they called me, and I was like, okay. And then I came back. I
thought a helicopter landed.
Yeah. Very different. So I went to the synth store. Yeah. So anyway.
Yeah. I mean, did you have a reaction to, not necessarily to that piece, that narrative piece that like we're all going to lose our jobs, but just how jumpy everyone is right now?
Here's my thesis. My thesis is that everyone who had a lot of crypto money has created a fund and they have ChatGPT read the news and then they invest automatically based on the news. And here's why. Because it's always the most basic freaking trade. So it'll be like, hey, Anthropic can write COBOL now. Oh, IBM's down 20%, which is exactly the sort of crap thinking that LLMs do. It's like, hey, who would be most affected by this news story? Well, obviously IBM, not taking into account that like IBM is massively diversified, has a lot of buffers, and is also deeply invested in LLM-based and AI transformation back to the day, right? So that's the sort of absolute, that's the thing, right? Like it's logical that IBM, like,
well, DoorDash was mentioned in that report because we're going to vibe code our own DoorDash, right? That's
it's funny.
That what you're working on?
I did a whole episode with Rich about cloning DoorDash with an LLM, and he tends to be the advocate for slower change, and I'm the one for faster change. But he made a very convincing case about the sheer number of moats. There's regulatory moats, and building relationships with restaurants involves walking around and talking to people, right? And so the fantasy, and everybody always said they could clone Twitter in a weekend, and you could.
Yeah, but right? I think the misunderstanding is code is not necessarily the most important thing.
No, it's where it sits in culture and how people communicate about it and how they use it as a communication tool. Like DoorDash is essentially like a phone system that's just between me and a restaurant and delivery drivers, right? Like it's not, everybody always says this because you can see it as a product, but nobody is like, oh man, I could vibe code Verizon. Right, but that's actually the same idea. It's just like, oh, well, what about a smaller Verizon? No, that still sucks. Like, why would I do that? Yeah. But that's what it is. Verizon it doesn't make your phones. It does install some wires, but most of the stuff you do just kind of runs. Most of the wires it installs, you're probably calling people not using those wires. You're using one cell phone transponder that then hits another one owned by a different company somewhere, right? But nobody's like, I can clone Verizon.
What's the hardest thing about building with AI right now? What are the things that it's not great at, and what are the things that it's not great at that you think it'll always not be great at, and others that with the next model release it'll knock it out of the park?
There's no stable platform, and there's no easy discipline, and it's a world filled with grifters. But it can also make code that works and runs in the browser, and so like. I actually need to throw that back to the audience, right? Like it's kind of all of us are going to have to decide collectively, are we going to build disciplines and craft around this? Or are we going to, and I'll kind of take it back to your subject, right? Are we going to try to protect our boundaries as craftspeople? Are we going to be like, nah, you know what? I always did it this way and that was the right way to do it.
Yeah.
Or are we going to let this in and then let the edges get kind of blurry because it starts to do things? And so a great example here would be illustration, right? Like most people in the creative industry would not really want to let AI become a staff illustrator, right? And sometimes it really is bad at it and you get the glaze.
Yeah.
Okay, so like we're going to have that conversation, and we're going to have probably, and here's the way that conversation's happening. That SVP that we're talking about is like, we should use more AI illustration. And then people are like, no, it's really, really bad. And they're right. But the SVP is like, no, I think we need to save the money and use the AI illustration. And now we start to go into this cycle and people just get really, really frustrated. I don't know how you break out of that, right? I think you have to have the SVP who will listen. But I think you also have to, like, if you want to get through in this world, you probably got to do a little hand waving and be like, okay, we're going to evaluate it. And I think it might be good over here. Actually, you know what it could do? We have an enormous set of images that we created over the last 25 years that are all spread through drives. We can now organize those and kind of build our own internal stock photography tool with descriptions. And now instead of using illustration, like you got to start going in different directions. I think what happens is person A comes in and is just like, save money. And the other person B is like, no, you're ruining my craft. And maybe that can sustain and we'll just end up in that circle for the rest of our lives. But if history is if like workplaces I've been in and are like, someone's got to yield and something has to give.
Yeah.
And so like what I would do is think, could I use these technologies to get more value out of the assets that I've got? And what does that mean for my craft? What does that mean for my discipline?
Yeah. How are you hiring right now? How is all this changing how you hire?
Oh God, man. I mean... we're looking.
Maybe are you would be the first question, but because that's
No,
part of the fear.
we're hiring solution engineers is kind of the title.
Forward deployed solution engineers?
Yeah, sort of. I mean, honestly, Palantir, everybody's favorite company, right? But what did Palantir do? They created 3 or 4 core technologies that are not as radical as they like to pretend, but essentially like database that talks to other database. And then what they did is they created a process around it. And the process is they can go into really, really hidebound organizations like large police departments, and a bunch of forward deploy engineers will come up with a scope and they will deliver software within, I think, about 4 months, built up from their tools, which have names like Gotham and Foundry and stuff like that, but are essentially like, enterprise software tools with nice menus that are pretty easy to use. And people who use it report to me that they really like the tools and they really like the team. It's the 4 months that is the miracle, even more than the products, because you can probably sculpt a lot of stuff out of SaaS or build up from component libraries, but it just kind of a lot comes for free. The data goes in. The evil happens later, right? It's we're going to get you this nice, easy platform to use, and we're going to communicate to you very clearly. Deloitte was there, and they spent 18 months, and they charged us $18 million, but it never shipped.
Yeah.
There's those stories. There's, Deloitte and Accenture and everybody, and they like those big, long engagements with dozens and dozens of people. And what Palantir said is we're going to get you that. So smart. I'm talking about it just because I think it's people don't understand it, because actually Palantir just sounds like evil company, but that's really what they do. They make CTOs at police departments go, wow, and that's a hell of a thing. They also only have 100 customers. So anyway, a solution engineer is a person who could have been a product manager, designer, or engineer, and they use AI tools, including the ones that we've built, and they build things for our clients, which include a big insurance company and a healthcare not-for-profit and many other things aside. And sort of there's also lots of interesting inbound. And so they might actually, I think what is different and maybe worth talking about is the pitch. The pitch has really changed, right? Because everybody knows you can build software with AI now, and that it may or may not be something they like.
Okay.
It may or may not look good or whatever. But I think what is very different is I keep finding our pitch process and our conversations tend towards the prototype, but the prototype is now working software. And so I often am in this situation where I'm like, hey, check this out. I just put it on a website, kind of looks like we were talking about, and it does everything that we talked about. And
you're doing this in the meeting, an hour later,
days later,
okay.
Right? You go think for a minute. Yeah. This is another thing is product still takes a lot of time. Everything I've been vibe coding, the projects I'm really working on are now 4 months old. And I've probably, what I do is a half hour a day. Things move so quickly, but my brain doesn't move that quickly. And so this fantasy that you're going to one-shot a new operating system, it's going to suck. Don't do it. Make something good over a couple of months. Nobody cares. And so, I think everything changes that way. You end up making stuff, throwing it over the wall, and it's almost like you're kind of dangling a tantalizing treat. You're just like, hey, check that out. Looks like what you were talking about, right? Would you like it? Because it could be real. How long would it take to be real? Oh, and that's the funny thing is pricing's really hard. Pitch to pricing is very unresolved. Shipping is kind of funny because it's sort of what the market will bear. Time and materials isn't good though.
Right. No, I was going to say.
Yeah. So we're swimming in that. We're trying to build an organization that is reactive to all of that, but it's tough.
And so when it comes to hiring, what are the key skills? You have to be able to talk to a customer, it sounds like. That sounds like a key thing.
Yes. I mean, we're blessed because we had an agency and it was a high-end agency. And so our network tends to be people who are really good communicators. I got to tell you, I would be very nervous starting my career working from home right now. I think wherever you are, you should go where people are, stand next to people and talk to other people because the value of delivering an artifact in isolation as a unit is going down. And that's not me saying that because I think it's a good thing. I don't for real, I don't necessarily think it is a good thing, but it's sure, do you agree? It seems to just be happening. The PRD just gets written by the bot and somebody gives it a thumbs up.
Yeah.
So what are you hiring for? You're hiring for client communication, agility with the new tools, understanding of the old platforms and the architecture, because the architecture is incredibly relevant.
Yeah.
So a product manager who understands product in general and all the things we mean when we say that, it still really matters. They're assembling with new tools. Engineers knowing a whole lot about the stack, that one, like the incredibly nudgy debugging expert is probably a little bit less valuable. But actually, you know what? Let me pause. Like, it's not less valuable, because what I see, here's what I actually say. I see a lot of people getting their head around these tools, and they build stuff and it's really fast, and it tends to be pretty trivial. Like, it's stuff they could have done in a couple of months, but now they can do it in a week or a couple of days, and they're like, whoa. And it feels they're kind of reevaluating their past. I think there's a transition point, and I'm finding that with myself with this stuff, which is you can. It's wild. It's really, really wild. Maybe it's not quite as stable as it needs to be, but once you get on the other side, you can go a lot deeper. So if you were somebody who could build a really good web application, you can actually now build a pretty complicated platform that does like a lot of other stuff I'll give you an example for me, and it's going to be real nudgy. I am a heavy user and fan of the Postgres database, just a real classic piece of open source technology. And it has a sort of vector extension that allows for different kinds of searching. And it was impenetrable to me, just really hard for me to get at this. But what I wanted to be able to take one group of very small text, think like tweet length, and I wanted to connect them to another group of really, like what are the tweets are a good example, or little posts. What are the posts that are like the posts in this set of posts? Okay, that is a hard query, just as recursive queries are. They're just like syntactically hard. They're semantically hard. My brain doesn't work that way. They're very, very accessible. I'm able to get all this value out of these tools that I knew was there, but that I literally, as a busy executive, I never had the 3 weeks to like just go figure it out. And now I can get to it. Now, that doesn't actually absolve me of having to figure it out, but it's so much easier to learn from a thing that is even broken than it is to learn from a set of documentation. That feels to me like where it goes. It doesn't go to like, wow, I can do everything I used to do so much faster. It goes to, now we can clear the whole roadmap and have a much deeper platform that is actually way more useful. Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
And I feel that like you need to be leaning into those, like if somebody is leaning into those conversations, that's a strong hiring signal, right? Like, I used to be able to do this, and I can still do that, but I actually am really interested in doing all of these things now, because that's I don't know if I'm going to be able to do all of them, but so to me, that would be some sense of motivation of depth towards depth, as opposed to more and more breadth and velocity, is actually a really powerful signal right now, because everybody's getting velocity and everybody's getting breadth.
Yeah. I mean, that's some of what's being commodified. You said be around humans, be able to talk to humans. What are some of the other things that you don't see AI ever being a great substitute for, that people should keep investing in, especially if you're a junior in your career right now?
I mean, I was just talking to somebody who works for local journalism organizations, and I'm like, you're safe, because nobody wants to read the restaurant review written by the robot, right? Like, I mean, product is still hard, right? Like, product is still really, really hard. And I don't know how you can get an LLM to loop and loop and loop and ship a product that looks and feels like the other products. But you end up in this weird Potemkin village of software where it's just not real. I was talking to somebody who has lost most of their eyesight the other day, and they were saying, and this really, really stuck with me, because the blind community is really excited to be able to build tools for themselves, right? Like, that's very motivating. You don't have to wait for the one blind programmer who's around to figure it out over there, and you don't have to wait for sighted people to kind of throw you an accessibility bone. You can take care of it yourself, and the tools are pretty accessible.
Right. I'm sure voice is a huge part of that.
All of it, right? And he said something fascinating. He's like, there's a lot of tools that are really good and accessible, and I think we all in this industry, we sort of pat ourselves on the back if we think about accessibility. But he's like, boy, you can tell when a blind person has built something. Oh my God! And you think about it, right? It's just like, they're not just focused on sort of this broad concept of accessibility, but like this deep concept of usability that's specifically for their use case. And I think it'd be very, very hard to throw that to an LLM and be like, because like you've missed that moment. You're going to say, make this really accessible, and it's going to pass a test.
Right. Well, because it doesn't understand. It's not sentient.
I could try to simulate this acquaintance, and I could build a bot that would kind of understand it. But it's like, at a certain point, that's just product work in the new world. And it's going to take time and thought. And maybe his particular use case and his particular situation about his vision, which is mostly gone, but not all, is really different than the next person, right? And so then product to me becomes, hey, maybe that next person who's lost all their vision or has only lost 50%, maybe there's a different version of this that's just for them. And the entire front end is completely different because their use case, even though it's a percentage different in terms of their eyesight, they might be able to perceive all sorts of stuff more efficiently, or it might need to be higher contrast or just whatever, right? And so like a really good product person assisted by an LLM might be able to make 7 different accessible versions of a content platform that never were possible before. But I think where we are right now is we're going like, at best, we're going like, follow these accessibility guidelines, Claude. And Claude's like, I have now made it accessible. And we go, wow, we're in the future. But that personalization, and then I think also just the fact that the ownership of it probably should be taken away, and people who are very low vision should build exactly what they need in interaction with the LLM and cut us out of the loop. And I think that would rule. Like that's a really good thing.
Yeah. I love that vision. Tickets to the future. I love to ask guests, what is something that sounds like science fiction, but that you think will be not only real, but commonplace in the next, pick your sort of time horizon?
First of all, we're in a very interesting place where the frontier models for AI are getting better, but they're not getting exponentially better, right? And so what I think we are in an interesting zone where they'll get faster and they'll get smaller and they'll probably use less energy, but it seems like we're almost like out of data. And so they won't get 10 times sort of quote smarter, but I think the products are going to get better on top of them. Like Claude Code is a product on top of an LLM, and people get confused about that, right? But it's a bunch of code that is good at working with this blurry database technology to produce other code. And so I think we are entering a world where a lot of that accelerates, but it probably gets a little more legible and a little more predictable. The only technology that I look at where I'm like, that would be weird, is world models, which is instead of language models, you're modeling states of the world. A lot of times, like NVIDIA is training on video. And it's sort of, this is the thing where you go, hey, robot, make me a pencil case. And it uses an LLM to say, what's a pencil case? It uses some rendering software to create a pencil case in 3D, and then it 3D prints you the pencil case, and then you go and you grab the pencil case. And so it's sort of like, and it's 3D printed, so it's got that weird, like 3D printing to me actually looks like AI art looks, like it's glazed, like it's glazed objects, right? So I think that to me, that loop, because even if that loop was really clumsy, it was like an hour and most of the pencil cases didn't work, and everybody's going to make fun of it, just like they make fun of the robots that fall down. If that loop starts to get faster and the coding gets better and the equipment gets better and the 3D printers get cheaper, you end up in this world where people are just kind of telling things to make things and telling things to drive places and telling things to do things and operate in the physical world. I actually think the LLM stuff has very high chances of sort of crashing out, because I don't think that like we're still going to want lawyers and we're still going to have developers. And there's decades of roadmap in software, and there's going to be all this new stuff that needs to get done. And so it's entirely possible that it will just accelerate, but that we'll still have something that looks very, very legible and similar to us in the future. I keep saying legible, that we have now. And it'll be like, yeah, man, everybody was freaking out, but I'm still a programmer and blah, blah, blah. Like, I think that's possible.
Yeah.
But man, when you can tell a thing to make a thing and it makes a thing, and then it can 100,000 things, and like I don't even know what that world looks like, because that's all the jobs.
Yeah.
Right?
And what do you see with the intersection of AI and climate change in a good way? There's some who say, oh my God, the amount of electricity, the amount of water, and maybe we're not even using LLMs. There are other approaches to AI that are less energy intensive. But when people say, "Oh my God, the water, the energy," there's the rejoinder is like, "Yeah, but AI is going to cure climate change." I can't tell you how,
Yeah, exactly.
but it's going to happen. Do you?
No, I think there's a few things going on. So I think as someone look, the environmental effects are bad, and it's terrible that a new thing has come to emit more greenhouse gases. Like we really didn't
Right. We
need
thought
that.
we had done it with Bitcoin, and then we were like, "Hold my beer."
Yeah, and we didn't need that to happen at the same time that we're decommissioning solar. Like, I mean, it's just really, it's in some ways incredibly bad luck. I personally can't make it go back in the box, so I'm going to go learn. That's just how I see the world. But I can also, here's what I believe. I like all of those criticisms are valid. And at the same time, it's very easy as like a climate oriented person to be like, are people going to stop driving? Are we going to stop like putting sulfur in the air? Like what? There's like 50 other things that we could do. Like no one who says stop LLMs, but then you're like, okay, well, we need everyone to stop driving. They're like, no, because no one can get anywhere without their car. And then you're like, well, when we actually have to retool society around that, because otherwise it's going to get really hot. And they're like, well, no, hold on a minute. And so like you end up in these cycles and they're not productive. Here's the way I would say the environmental costs are real, but what's happened is that the environmental costs have become essentially a truthful folk narrative to talk about how difficult and scary and painful it is to see your life get continually smashed into bits. Another truthful folk narrative is Epstein Island, where it turns out that lots of powerful people were really up to evil. Okay. And so like, is that every person in government? No, but it sure feels like it, right? And so like, is every data center evil? Well, I typed data center into Google. Well, you use the data center. It's just like, but no, they're not evil. But at the same time, that folk narrative is a way for people to say, I really don't like this. And nobody's listening to them. Google doesn't go like, yeah, you know what? You're right. We are doing really bad stuff. And we're going to keep doing it because we like the money. They're not going to say that. They're going to say, well, you like Google, right? So people need a way to express and talk about the change and the fear that lets them feel like they have some control. And one way to do that is to be like, data centers are bad. I don't want to fight that because I actually think that they're right to have that feeling and to assert that power and say, I want to have a say in what the data and the world and the commons looks like in the future. And so what's tricky is you end up in these little blue sky bickers where people are like, well, it uses the water. And then somebody else will be like, no, it doesn't really use that much water. But I think if you think about it this way, which is like, it's a folk narrative around fear that is based on reality, and we should take it seriously because it's people saying, I want to have control over my own destiny for my family. That's a really good thing to talk about as opposed to, and then you can bring it back to data centers, but that's kind of what I hear when I hear that, right? And then I'm on Claude all day. Like, I get it. Like, it's a kind of hypocrisy, but I think that's what we're all processing.
And on the positive possible side of things that, if this unlocks novel discoveries, pharmaceuticals, new solutions to climate change, this something that
the climate thing, I mean, this unlocks an enormous amount of stuff, and it allows people to get access to things that the computer can do that it couldn't do before. And it lets people who need logistics and software is incredibly powerful in our culture, and people don't know how, right? They don't know why Salesforce is so powerful. It's powerful because it lets you move one box to another, and then people go, oh, I got to do something with that box. And then they either use it to make money or they use it to send out like a shoe. Like, I mean, it's just like, it is an engine that drives all those connections. And so people don't process that unbelievable power unless they're in the industry. And so like AI can decentralize that power. We're in this funny trade where like a couple giant companies are emerging that have a lot of the power over the LLMs, but there's also a lot of LLMs that are running in smaller and smaller environments, and you can vibe code and build your own system instead of buying one, and it can be just right for your organization, or you can talk to us and we'll do it for you with our tools. And so this decentralization and this change in power, we've seen this before, but I don't actually see exactly how it's going to reconsolidate, right? Because this is such a destabilizing technology landing so quickly. I don't want to hear about AI for climate because there's no magic solution. And we just have to kind of be honest at some point about what we're doing here. And so, everybody wanted, I wrote that piece for the Times and everybody's like, the ecological cost. I'm like, I have an absolutely smaller footprint, even if I used Claude all day nonstop.
Yeah, just by living in the city.
Living in the city, and I actually live a consciously, I mostly don't eat beef. Like I just all these little things, aside from being heavy, like I don't do a lot of, I don't fly if I can help it. And really very, very rarely compared to a lot of people. And just sort of like, it's be very easy for me to claim a high ground, but it would also be pointless. So, because they're right that it uses a bunch of electricity that we shouldn't use right now. So I just don't buy these loops. Look, we can make a strong climate case in a second, which is suddenly climate data is incredibly easy to use across a variety of platforms. You can now parse and manipulate NetCDF files, which are one of the dominant tools for climate, and you could use them and integrate them in a million different ways across a whole lot of applications. But what you see is like, Zillow or Redfin is taking their climate risk data out of their listings, right? We could already do that. We're choosing not to. And so, just when are we going to buck up? I don't know. That's the real question. The real question is when do you get smacked in the face enough, enough superstorms? Is it our kids or is it us? It's probably our kids, the way humanity's going. But at what point do we smack ourselves in the face and kind of run into the rake enough that we're like, wow, I don't like it when it goes in my eyes. It hurts.
Yeah.
I want to stop it. Right. And so I kind of get there when you're like, hey, what do we do about climate with AI? I'm like, a million things. I would love to have that one-day seminar. That would be really fun for me. But I'd also feel really full of shit. And so I don't know, man. I don't know.
I don't know.
You're a dad. It's tricky.
It is tricky. Yeah. I can ask one last question since I was going to ask about kids. What are you teaching your kids right now? Well, kind of gets back to what you look for in talent, I guess. But the kids are beyond talent.
They should be a little more talented. Yeah, that's right. You hear this, children? Be talented. My son is interested in programming. He's good at math. But, most of my life is just keeping them off a screen. If I could just smash every phone with a hammer, right? It's horrible. It's horrible. My entire life is saying, could you please put your phone down? Could you give me your phone? Okay, we're done with the phone. That's it. So I'm I'm not going to put them on another thing that they can talk into. And, here's what I really see. I see my daughter likes to shop. She assembles with friends and they go thrift store shopping and they spend money, not a lot, and they only buy a few things, and that is her activity. And then she talks with her friends on the phone. My son goes and plays Pokemon Go with a buddy, right? And they're 14. These are just sort of they're in this milieu, and so the AI, they find it interesting but sort of goofy. And when I've tried to use it to help with homework, it just absolutely whiffed the geometry. It just didn't know what to do, and so they're not very impressed. Right? They're just like, oh, okay. They like when it does something funny. They like when it makes
an image or something. Yep.
Stupid pictures.
Yep.
My son is interested in using it to program a game, right? And so but I don't really want to sit down with him and stare at a screen for a couple hours. I want to talk, or I want to, we'll go do something. We'll go for a walk. I don't know. But that, we have enough screens. And so it actually comes down there. And I don't feel, he's learning polynomials. He'll be okay. I'm like, we'll get him. He can learn a program later. The thing is it's not like I feel that, that old sort of, and I never believed this anyway, but this idea that you'd need to learn a program young and that was always where the talent, it's real. There are a lot of very talented young programmers, but it's not as urgent.
Right.
I want them to be good systems thinkers who can describe systems, because that's
exactly what I interviewed the head of product for GitHub a year ago.
Yeah.
And he also helps run a school in North Carolina. And systems thinking is exactly what he said. He really wants his kids and others to learn. That was his sort of meta skill of the moment.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think how do these pieces fit together? And go get the systems thinking book by Danilo Meadows and stocks and flows, and just okay. And then where does the computer fit in, and where doesn't it? I mean, we are also probably headed towards a world where things are listening to us, and for better or for worse. And code is a little bit of like a substrate. Like it writes a program. Half the time when Claude or ChatGPT are writing a program, it's in answer to a question. You don't even know they're doing it, right? They're doing some math for you, and that's how they don't screw up. So, but anyway, it's all going to turn out great.
Good.
Yeah, don't worry.
Thanks for bringing us home.
Absolutely.
Paul, thank you so much for sharing your studio. I really, really enjoyed this conversation.
Anytime. Come back anytime. Thank you very much.
Awesome.
Okay, bye.
This is Future Around and Find Out, and I am so excited to keep exploring with you, to keep steering the future in the right direction. Go to futurearound.com to get the newsletter, to ask questions of upcoming guests, and to find more ways that we can build a better future together.